Hello and welcome back to a new episode of my podcast, The True Crime Cocktail Hour. This is where we come together on Fridays to enjoy a little after-work cocktail together and take a closer look at a true crime case. I hope you all had a good start to the year 2025. And with the new year, there's also going to be a small change here on this podcast. From now on, I will upload video series, meaning that from now on there will be 4 videos in a row on an overarching theme or topic, i.e. love triangles, entomology, forensic anthropology, investigators and their biggest cases, and so on. I prepared a very long list. So 4 videos, 4 different countries, 4 different motives, 4 different background stories, but they all have the overarching theme in common. There will also be a lot more short videos, background information on the topic, quizzes, cocktail recipes, fun fact, and so much more. And today, my dear children, is the start of the first main topic: historical true crime cases. For today's case, we'll be having a smoked rosemary Negroni sour. If you want to recreate this cocktail, just keep on watching. I'll add the ingredients and several steps to make this cocktail as the story progresses. Okay, enough talk. Let me get everything ready, and then we get started with case 1, historical true crime cases, the disturbing but incredible story of the murder of Hildegard Rodriguez. Our story today begins in 1879 in Ferrol, a town in Galicia, Spain. And this is where on the 23rd of April 1879, Aurora Rodriguez Carballeira was born as the youngest of 2 daughters. Even though she grew up in a middle-class/upper-class family, as a woman, she was denied access to a general education. Same thing for her older sister, Josefa. And we have to talk about these 2 sisters for a second, okay? The fact that neither of them was allowed to go to school and the fact that neither of them ever got married are the 2 only things, literally, these 2 gals have in common. They could have not been any more different. Josefa, she was a wild child. Woof. She went through life rather carefree. She never thought much about the future. She preferred to just live in the present. She liked to have fun. She liked to go out dancing and drinking. And she didn't waste one thought about, finding a husband or settling down or becoming like a housewife or whatever. But not because she was shy or anything or because she was a child of sadness. No, she preferred to entertain various relationships with men. Aurora, on the other hand, preferred to keep to herself, and she enjoyed losing herself in the countless books that her father passionately collected. Books about literally everything, from art and philosophy all the way over to politics. And by reading all of these books, she managed to build up this incredible knowledge that no school in the world could have offered her. She just educated herself. Josefa's and Aurora's parents never pushed their daughters into marriage, and neither of them ever wanted to get married, but for different reasons. Josefa, like I said, she preferred to, stay single and mingle. Like, her various affairs regularly caused a real stir in the neighborhood. Aurora, on the other hand, never wanted to get married because she did not think much of men at all. She literally wanted nothing to do with them. She thought they were downright filth. Just useless barbarians who could do nothing but drink, abuse, and assault, according to Aurora. In her entire life, there was only ever one man she had truly loved. And this man, or I should rather say boy, was her nephew, because, it just be like that sometimes. Her sister Josefa eventually fell pregnant, and she gave birth to a son whom she named Pepe. Now, Josefa never, considered her much of a mother figure, as you can imagine. So instead of just taking care of this child, she just handed it over to her sister Aurora and moved to Madrid. So now it's just Aurora and little Pepito. Aurora decided to take care of this child and raise the boy. And she did that with passion and much dedication, desperately trying to prevent him from becoming as immature and as good for nothing as most men. She read to him a whole lot, countless books. She also taught him how to play the piano. And it turned out that little Pepito over here is highly, highly gifted. A real child prodigy. Look, this boy, when he was 4 years old, already played his own concerts. And even in the Spanish court, people wanted to see and most importantly hear the child prodigy. Little Pepito became famous and he earned good money with his concerts for the standards of this time. Now, as you can imagine, the story about the child prodigy eventually left Ferrol and eventually reached the city of Madrid, and with that, the ears of his mother, Josefa, who then returned to Ferrol, claimed the child for herself again, and literally snatched him from Aurora's hands. Aurora is devastated about this, but she figures that out of every tragedy comes something good. Aurora discovers her talent as an educator. She already considered herself an expert on how to raise a child properly, but she took it one step further. So for the next few months, Aurora read everything about education and how to raise a child properly. She did that day in, day out. And one day, she stumbled across a book entitled, quote, The Improvement of the Human Race. This book was written by the British scholar Francis Galton, who should later be called the father of eugenics. In layman's terms, eugenics makes use of the learning about human genetics or the gene pool of a population with the goal of increasing positively valued hereditary traits and reducing, if not even eradicating, poorly valued hereditary traits. Meaning, only civilized, educated and healthy people should be allowed to reproduce, thus creating a more advanced race of humans. Everything else, i.e. everything uneducated, everything pathological, is not even worth living and therefore should be eliminated. Now, if that doesn't already sound like a huge red flag to you, let me just say the Nazis, back in the days, misused this concept to justify their racial struggle, thus murdering countless sick, disabled, and non-Aryan people. Aurora became a fanatical supporter of eugenics and the teachings of Francis Galton. She was also a women's rights activist, so she was pro-emancipation, but always with a healthy dose of hatred for man. Aurora couldn't stop thinking about it. She could not stop thinking about eugenics and this new race of humankind and the more advanced and progressive and non-violent society that would develop from it. Aurora forges a plan. She will create the perfect human being. Another child prodigy who will be the savior of Spain and revolutionize the country. The prototype of eugenics, so to speak. But this time she will carry this child herself. This time it will be her own child, one that cannot be snatched away from her hands, just like little Pepito. So Aurora wanted to get pregnant. Okay, bad news for Aurora was, back then, you needed a man for that. So Aurora started thinking, okay, who could the father be? It had to be someone who was civilized and educated and intelligent. It had to be someone she wouldn't find too repulsive. And it had to be someone who was guaranteed to not lay any claim to this child. So she fucked a priest called Alberto Palas, who just as Aurora had planned, did not want to have anything to do with the child in her belly. And so Hildegard Rodriguez was born on the 9th of December, 1914. From day one, the life of this child was consistently planned. Get up at 7 a.m. and not a minute later. 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. lessons in mathematics, languages, music, art, politics, philosophy, and so on. Short break just to eat something, always healthy, always nutritious. And in the afternoons, this child had to learn how to play the piano, how to play chess, how to play tennis, how to dance the waltz, how to use a typewriter. Or she had to read for hours on end. Like, not books that are fun or anything, but more books like, what was one of them called? Neither Jesus nor Marx. This poor thing didn't have any friends to play with. She never had time to just be a goddamn child. It was just her and her mother who controlled and monitored her every move. But get this, at the age of 2, Hildegard could read at an adult level. At age 4, she was able to write entire essays on the typewriter without making spelling mistakes. When she was 8 years old, she spoke 3 other languages fluently. Apart from Spanish, she was also now able to speak English, French, and God help us all, German. Can you imagine being 8 years old and your mother forces you to learn a language that has 3 different words for the word the? You know, as a German, I really feel for her. And then, at the age of 11, she wrote her first ever essay, not just on any topic, but on the sexual liberation of women. One of her essays on the sexual reform was even printed in a newspaper, and it caused a real uproar in the neighborhood, because this article was written and thought of in such a professional and progressive way. People had a really hard time believing that the author was an 11-year-old girl. But that was really just the beginning. Hildegard, over the next few years, published over 100 more articles. She published entire books. And apparently she still had enough time and energy to start going to law school at the age of 13. And then 4 years later, after successfully completing her studies, she was still not done, and she also began studying philosophy and linguistics. Aurora's little experiment / project is a complete success. Her own daughter is now known throughout the entire country as the youngest female lawyer, the child prodigy, an author, revolutionary, social reformer, and spokesperson for equal rights for women and men. Although, before you start celebrating her, hold your horses, okay? You see, her social morals were still very similar to those of her mother, and from today's perspective, I gotta say, outdated. Listen, she's in favor of sexual equality. She's in favor of modern contraceptive methods. She's in favor of free love relationships. Great. But she's also for eugenics, for the precious offspring. She is pro-forced abortions. She is pro-euthanasia. She is pro-forced sterilization. She's against homosexuality. She even describes it as, quote-unquote, sickening in one of her essays. The year 1930 should change Hildegard's life abruptly, and with it, Aurora's. In the year 1930, the military dictatorship of General Miguel Primo de Rivera was overthrown in Spain. The entire country was in a state of upheaval. People were crying out for reforms, for change, and for a new government. And small parties such as the Republicans and the Socialists were aggressively trying to claim the country's government for themselves. And in the middle of it all, Hildegard Rodriguez. You know, Hildegard had a really big fan club at the Socialist Party, and she was also not completely averse to the party. In 1929, she was already a member of the Socialist Youth. Shortly afterwards, she became their spokesperson and later their vice president. She became an official member of the Socialist Party in 1930. However, the more Hildegard is known for her reforms and her cry for equality, the more enemies rise to the surface. I mean, obviously, she wants change, she poses a threat, And let's just say Hildegard, she was used to, coming home from work and seeing that people had written insults, death threats, and all kinds of other things on the walls in her hallway, right? But Aurora, she was a little bit more worried for her daughter's safety, so just to make sure that nothing ever really happened to her little project, Aurora bought a revolver through some contacts, just to defend herself and her daughter against their political enemies. But not only, because as a matter of fact, their political enemies were Aurora's smallest problem at the time. You see, Hildegard Rodriguez turned 18 years old in 1933. The controllable little girl had become a young woman with incredible knowledge, but also a young woman with her own ideas and a healthy dose of curiosity. Curiosity for the world that is out there. Curiosity for people who happen to be not her mother. Long story short, Hildegard slowly but surely started to turn away from her mother. She had her own goals, her own thoughts, her own ideas. And not to forget, she also had an incredible knowledge about psychology. And she started to question the rather controlling nature of her mother. In 1933, she became close pen pals with the socialist, biologist, and historian H.G. Wells. And it was just like a mutual friendship. The two of them just enjoyed talking, sharing thoughts and ideas. And H.G. Wells eventually wanted to meet Hildegard in person. So he invited her over to his hometown in England. So that was like the chance for Hildegard to finally see something of the world and talk to somebody else. So it's like obvious that she was keen to accept this invitation. But Aurora had absolutely no intention of letting her daughter travel to England, and certainly not at an invitation of a man. According to Aurora, in any case, all the men were after Hildegard, and not one of them had good intentions. First, this H.G. Wells guy, who had the audacity to invite her over to England, right? And then she had only recently learned about a possible liaison between her daughter and some fella named Antonio Villenas. And then Aurora always felt like her daughter and their housekeeper, Julia, were, exchanging those conspicuous glances. Like she always felt like something was up with her daughter that she had no idea about. And over time, Aurora became obsessed with the idea that her daughter, her little project, was being taken away from her, just like little Pepito. Everyone wanted to drive a wedge between her and her daughter. H.G. Wells, Antonio Villenas, the housekeeper, the Socialist Party, just everyone. And so in May of 1933, Aurora locked her 18-year-old daughter Hildegard in their shared apartment. Hildegard was no longer allowed to leave the apartment without her mother. The telephone wires were cut off, and all the letters for Hildegard were intercepted by her mother. Anything to avoid losing control over her little project. But Hildegard resisted. She was determined to travel to England and meet new people. And yes, even men. Hildegard had had enough of her mother's general rejection of all things male. I mean, Hildegard was educated enough to realize that her mother's rejection was irrational. She had had enough of constantly being controlled at every turn, that her mother was always by her side, that she did not have 1 minute to herself anymore. To Hildegard, this apartment started to feel like a prison, and Hildegard felt like her mother had become downright paranoid Aurora realized that her daughter was slowly but surely slipping away from her control. And that after everything she had done for this child, and after everything they had achieved together, Aurora had done everything she could to create this superhuman woman of the future, the woman who was to lead Spain into this bright new future. That was what she was conceived for. This is what she was designed and planned for. But the project had failed. The project got involved with men, even wanted to work with them. The project wanted to travel the world and stand on its own 2 feet. The project finally wanted to break free. And that was her death sentence. It's the 9th of June, 1933, 8 o'clock in the morning. Aurora went up to their housekeeper Julia and asked her to take the dog for a walk, preferably a very long walk. Now Julia, she was a little bit puzzled at her request, but she did as Aurora told her to. As soon as the housekeeper had left the apartment with the dog, Aurora went into her room, got the revolver, and slowly walked towards her daughter's room. Hildegard was still sleeping. For the first time ever, her mother had not woken her up at 7 a.m. for good reason. Aurora stands in front of the bed and watches her daughter sleep for a minute. She then unlocked her revolver and shot her daughter 3 times in the head and 1 time in the chest. Hildegard was killed instantly. After murdering her daughter, she turned around, left the apartment, and went straight to the office of lawyer Juan Botella and confessed to the crime. When she was asked during her trial why she had done this, Aurora said, quote, "The sculptor who discovers the smallest flaw in his work has the right to destroy it." Aurora never showed 1 ounce of remorse. Quite the opposite. She openly admitted that she would do it again, and she was ultimately sentenced to 27 years in prison. She spent the first 2 years in prison, and then in 1935 she was transferred to a psychiatric institution due to schizophrenia, where she died in 1955. Rumor has it that she spent most of her time looking after and taking care of a doll. This case was recently made into a movie called The Red Virgin with my personal favorite actress Naiva Nimri in the role of Aurora and Alba Planas in the role of Hildegard. You can watch it on Amazon Prime and I can only recommend it. It's disturbing, but it's a masterpiece. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up and comment and, do the things that you do so I know that you enjoy what I do here on my cute little channel. Other than that, I will see you again in 2 weeks for another cocktail and of course another mysterious true crime case, case 2 of the series historical true crime cases. Until then, have a lovely weekend and I'll see you next time. Mwah.